All right, everyone, welcome in. Today, we're going to be diving into a book that seriously changed the game for understanding how our bodies move.
Oh, yeah.
It's Yoga Anatomy by Leslie Kaminoff and Amy Matthews. Have
Uh,
you seen this one?
Absolutely. This book was huge for me. A total game changer. It's not just like memorizing muscle names.
Yes, yeah.
It's like you can actually see the brilliance in how it all works together.
So getting a peek under the hood, right? So
Exactly.
instead of going pose by pose, which we could do, we're going deeper on like the systems that make those poses possible.
I like it.
So breath, the spine, and how our muscles actually make us move.
It all comes back to the fundamentals, right?
Mhm.
Those are the things that are at play, whether you're holding Warrior 2 or just walking down the street.
That's so true. It makes you realize yoga anatomy isn't just for yogis, it's for anyone who has a body.
Right. And Kaminoff and Matthews, they do such a good job of connecting those dots between what's happening like at the cellular level all the way to how we move in the world.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How do they connect those dots? It sounds almost microscopic.
Well, it starts with this idea that even our cells, they're constantly taking in what they need and releasing what they don't.
Okay.
And they use these yogic terms, prana and apana, to describe these fundamental energies.
So prana is like the intake and apana is the like the outtake.
You got it.
Sure.
Every cell needs nutrients, right?
Yeah.
That's prana.
Yeah.
And it has to get rid of waste that's apana.
Yeah.
It's happening all the time on a micro and macro level.
So is that what we're talking about when we talk about blockages in yoga? Like creating space for those energies to flow?
Exactly. Kaminoff and Matthews, they talk about sukha, that feeling of good space in the body,
Mm-hmm.
and how yoga helps us clear out the bad space, the dukkha, where things are stuck.
It's like when you finally release a tight hamstring, you're like, ah, there it is.
Yes.
Or you feel your breath flowing more easily.
Yeah.
That's sukha.
Yes, exactly.
I like it.
And one of the key players in all of this is, of course, the spine.
Oh, the spine. So much more than just a bunch of bones, right?
Oh, absolutely. The spine is like this marvel of evolution, perfectly adapted over millions of years to support our unique way of moving.
Speaking of evolution, didn't our spines start out straight? Something about fish.
You're remembering correctly. Our early fishy ancestors, they had perfectly straight spines.
Okay.
It made sense. In the water, the pressure is distributed evenly, so they didn't need any fancy curves.
Makes sense, yeah.
But as life ventured onto land, gravity became a whole new challenge.
Yeah, I imagine trying to stand upright with a fish spine wouldn't end well.
No, not at all. So over time, natural selection, it favored creatures who developed an arch in their spines. Think about it like an architectural archway.
Oh, okay.
It's inherently stable because it redirects force.
Oh, that's cool.
That arch is that primary curve we still have in our thoracic spine today.
That's why babies are born with that C-shaped spine, right?
Exactly. Then, as babies start lifting their heads and eventually walking, the secondary curves, the cervical in the neck and lumbar in the lower back, those develop.
Wow, our spines really are a living record of our evolution. From sea to land and from crawling to walking upright.
Exactly. And it's those curves that allow our spine to be both strong, sthera, and flexible, which is our sukha.
How does that work? How can something be both stable and mobile?
Think about like a suspension bridge.
Okay.
You have those strong cables for support, that's like the bones of our spine.
Mhm.
And then you have the more flexible roadbed that allows for movement, that's like the discs and ligaments.
Okay.
They work together to create both strength and adaptability.
Okay, that makes so much sense. And this is where the breath comes in, right?
So,
Because I can feel that connection between my breath and my spine, especially in certain poses.
absolutely. The breath, particularly the movement of the diaphragm,
Mm-hmm.
has a profound impact on the spine.
This is where I always get tripped up, chest breathing versus belly breathing. What does yoga anatomy have to say about that?
They kind of debunk that whole idea.
Really?
The diaphragm, that dome-shaped muscle that sits below the lungs,
Yeah.
that's the primary muscle of respiration. It doesn't care if you're breathing into your chest or your belly.
So are you saying those different breathing techniques are basically irrelevant?
Not irrelevant, but they are variations on a theme.
Okay.
Other muscles, called accessory muscles, can influence how we breathe.
Got it.
But the diaphragm, it's always the initiator.
Okay. So how does this all connect back to creating that good space, that sukha we were talking about earlier?
It's all about something called intrinsic equilibrium. Basically, when your breathing is unrestricted, your body maintains a natural balance of pressure between your chest and abdomen. When you hold tension, that restricts the flow.
So tension can literally affect how I breathe.
Absolutely. And on the flip side, Learning to breathe freely can help release tension
Hmm.
and restore that natural equilibrium.
It's like a two-way street.
Exactly.
Wow, this is already changing how I think about my breath. It's not just about getting oxygen, it's about creating balance in my whole system.
Yes.
What about like moving beyond breathing? Where does flexibility and range of motion fit into all of this?
That's where things get really interesting. Yoga anatomy really emphasizes balanced joint space and efficient movement patterns over extreme flexibility.
So it's not just about how far you can stretch.
Not at all. The book, it actually changes how we even think about joints. They're not just fixed points where bones meet, they're more like events.
Joints as events, what does that even mean?
It's a dynamic interaction, a place where movement happens, where forces are transmitted.
That makes joints sound way more interesting than I ever thought possible.
Right. And to understand how they work, you have to look at all the elements involved.
Yeah.
Bones, cartilage, synovial fluid for lubrication, ligaments for stability. It's like a finely tuned machine.
So how does yoga anatomy suggest we find balance in all of that?
It's not even about symmetry. It's about how forces are distributed within the joint.
Okay.
A healthy joint has balanced space, where pressure is evenly distributed across the entire joint surface. When that space is off, that's when you run into problems.
So it's not about forcing my body into a pretzel. It's about finding that sweet spot where everything is aligned and moving efficiently.
You got it.
I like it.
And of course, none of this is possible without muscles. But yoga anatomy doesn't just list muscles in isolation. It looks at how they work together.
Yes, it's all about those muscle chains, right?
Exactly. It's not just about individual muscles contracting, but how they work in concert, almost like a symphony.
A symphony of muscles, huh?
I know, right?
I like that. But I have to admit, sometimes when I'm in a yoga class, it feels like my muscles are playing more of a beginner's scale than a symphony.
Well, everyone starts somewhere.
Yeah.
But understanding the different types of muscle contractions can really help you fine-tune your practice.
Okay, hit me with those different types. I've heard of
So
concentric and eccentric, but they always sounded kind of intimidating.
they're not as complex as they sound, I promise. Let's use a bicep curl as an example. So when you lift the weight, your bicep muscle is shortening, right?
Right.
That's a concentric contraction.
Okay, that makes sense. What about when I lower the weight back down?
That's when the eccentric contraction kicks in. So the muscle is lengthening, but it's still engaged. It's controlling the movement.
So it's not just letting the weight drop, it's actively lengthening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And eccentric contractions are super important in yoga because they help us build strength and control as we move in and out of poses.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And what about when I'm just holding the weight steady, like neither lifting nor lowering?
That's an example of an isometric contraction. The muscle is engaged, but it's not changing length. Think about holding plank pose. Your core muscles are doing a lot of isometric work.
That's helpful. I can see how understanding those different types of contractions would make me more aware of how my muscles are working in every pose. There's something else that always trips me up, though, this whole idea of pushing and pulling in yoga.
Ah, yes. That classic misconception that muscles can push.
So they can't.
Nope. Muscles can only contract, which means they can only pull on the bones they're attached to.
Wow.
So even when it feels like you're pushing, it's actually a series of pulls from
Okay.
different muscle groups that are creating that movement.
Mind blown. I've been doing this all wrong, or at least thinking about it wrong. But if muscles can only pull, how does that explain, say, pushing myself up from a forward fold?
That's where the interplay of opposing muscle groups comes in. So as you rise from a forward fold, your hip extensors, those muscles at the back of your legs, are contracting and pulling your torso upright.
So it's like a dance between different muscle groups, some contracting while others lengthen?
Precisely. And yoga anatomy highlights another really crucial element in muscle training. Resistance.
Resistance. So the more I struggle in a pose, the better it is for me.
Not exactly. It's not about struggling. It's about challenging your muscles in a way that helps them calibrate their tone.
Okay, break that down for me. What is muscle tone and how do I calibrate it?
So muscle tone is basically your muscles' readiness to respond. It's like having the right amount of tension in a rubber band. Not too loose, not too tight.
Okay.
And when you encounter resistance, whether it's from gravity, a yoga prop, or even your own body weight,
Mm-hmm.
it sends feedback to your nervous system through those sensory receptors we talked about earlier.
So working against resistance is like having a conversation between my muscles and my brain.
Exactly. And that conversation is what helps you develop strength, coordination, and body awareness. It's how you refine those beginner scales into a beautiful symphony of movement.
This is all starting to make so much more sense. But when we were talking about the spine earlier, something you said really piqued my
Oh,
curiosity.
yeah.
You mentioned how the curves of the spine create space, which is so important for that sukha feeling. But how does that actually work with breathing?
That's a fantastic question. It gets to the heart of how yoga anatomy helps us understand the interconnectedness of all these systems. You see, those curves in the spine aren't just there for structural support.
Right.
They also create space for our internal organs,
Hmm.
including the lungs.
So the shape of my spine is directly affecting how much air I can take in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And not just the shape of the spine as a whole, but also how we move each segment of the spine influences our breath capacity. Think about it: when you slouch, you're essentially compressing the front of your chest.
Right.
You're limiting the space your lungs have to expand. But when you lengthen your spine, you create more room for your lungs to fill with air.
That makes so much sense. I've definitely noticed that when I'm like hunched over my desk, my breathing gets shallower. It's like my body instinctively knows that it can't take a full breath in that position.
Exactly. Your body's constantly sending you signals. Learning to pay attention to those signals is a big part of what yoga anatomy is all about. But it's not just about noticing how much air you take in.
Mm-hmm.
It's also about the quality of that breath.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the difference between like just breathing and having a high quality breath?
Think about it this way. You can take short, shallow breaths and technically still be getting oxygen, right?
Right.
But those breaths wouldn't be very efficient.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't do much to, like, calm your nervous system or release tension in the body.
Mm-hmm.
A high-quality breath, on the other hand, is one that's smooth, deep, and even. It's a breath that originates from the diaphragm, expands the rib cage three-dimensionally, and creates a sense of spaciousness throughout the torso.
So a high quality breath is like a full body experience, not just something that happens in my chest.
Exactly. It's about engaging the diaphragm fully, allowing the ribs to move freely, and creating space for the breath to flow effortlessly.
That makes me think about something we discussed earlier, that concept of intrinsic equilibrium. Are you saying that a high quality breath is essential for maintaining that balance within the body?
Precisely. When we breathe fully and deeply, we not only oxygenate ourselves more efficiently, but we also regulate our nervous system, massage our internal organs, and even influence our emotional state. It's all connected.
This is blowing my mind. I never realized how much power I had over my own internal state just by changing the way I breathe.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Yoga anatomy reminds us that we have this incredible intelligent system within us that's constantly working to maintain balance.
It is pretty incredible.
And the more we understand how that system works, the more empowered we become to support its natural healing and resilience.
This is truly revolutionary. It's making me rethink everything I thought I knew about my body and how to move it.
It's about moving from a place of awareness, honoring the interconnectedness of all these systems.
It's like we've been exploring this map of our own amazing internal landscape.
Right.
But instead of mountains and rivers, it's spines and diaphragms.
What's so cool is that yoga anatomy doesn't just give us the map.
Yeah,
It gives us the tools to actually navigate that landscape,
it does.
with more skill and awareness.
And not about like achieving some perfect pose
No,
or becoming a human pretzel,
not at all.
like we talked about.
It's about moving in a way that feels good, that supports our health and well-being.
Yes.
And frankly, it just makes us feel more at home in our bodies.
Yes, that's what's resonating with me the most, I think. It's this sense of empowerment. Like,
Yeah.
the more I understand how this amazing machine works,
Right.
the more I can make choices that support its natural intelligence.
Exactly. It's about shifting from a place of, like, blindly following instructions
Yeah.
to really listening to your body's feedback and making informed decisions.
So good. Well, as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what's the one thing you hope listeners will take away from yoga anatomy? Like, what's that nugget of wisdom you always find yourself coming back to?
For me, it's this idea that knowledge is power, but only when it's applied.
Ooh, I like that.
So often we gather all this information, but it just stays stuck up here.
Totally.
The real magic happens when we take those insights about anatomy and breath and movement and actually translate it into a felt experience
Yeah.
on the mat and in our everyday lives.
It's like that saying, knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad.
Exactly. And in the context of yoga anatomy, wisdom is taking that knowledge about your spine, your breath, your muscles, and using it to move through the world with more grace, ease and awareness.
It's about bridging that gap between knowing and feeling,
Yes,
between theory and practice.
absolutely. And when we do that, I think we unlock a whole new level of embodiment,
Yeah.
a deeper understanding of what it truly means to inhabit these incredible bodies of ours.
So well said. This has been such a pleasure diving into the world of yoga anatomy with you today.
Likewise.
I know I'm walking away with a whole new appreciation for this incredible system we call the human body.
You do.
And for our listeners, remember, this is just the beginning of the exploration. Take these insights, explore your own inner landscape, and discover the joy of moving with awareness. Until next time, happy breathing.